Okay, Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. We are back for Finance All Services. Director Raymond, if you would kindly introduce your team and then take it away. Ask that you keep your presentation to about 10 minutes if possible. Folks, if you're going to be speaking, please be sure to speak into the microphone because the hearings are televised so folks at home can hear what you're saying. I'm Eric Costello, Chair of the Committee from the 11th District, Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee, Council President Brandon Scott. We have Jeff Amoros representing Mayor Jack Young, Kimberly Rubens, and Rebecca Tabb from the Office of the Council President. And sitting to my immediate right, handing stuff out, Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. Director Raymond, take it away, please.
Good afternoon. Chairman Costello, honorable members of the committee, I'm Henry Raymond, Director of Finance for the city. I'm joined today by the following individuals: Steve Kraus, Deputy Finance Director; Janelle Rogers, Treasury Chief; Janice Simmons, Revenue Collection Chief; Sandy Stecker, Accounting and Payroll Services Chief; Bob Sinemy, Budget Chief; Aaron Scher, Procurement Chief; Doug Kerr, the Risk Chief. Also joined by Bill Clinton, the Director for the Finance Project Management Office, and Johanna Collado for the Integrity Office. We have a brief slideshow. All of our services will be able to be maintained with current level of service, and all of our services support priority outcome, accountability, and transparency. We have a mission statement, and our mission statement includes providing excellent customer service to our citizens, collecting and investing all monies due to the city, managing the city's debt, and developing and executing sound financial policies and practices. Next slide, we have a high-level organizational chart of the department where you see Director, Deputy Director, the Offices of Fiscal Integrity and Grants Management, followed by the bureaus: Accounting and Payroll Services, Budget, Procurement, Revenue Collection, Risk Management, Treasury, and the Office of Project Management. Moving to the first slide, revenue collection. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $6.9 million, which is general fund. This unit primarily is responsible for the majority of bills issued by the city and handles all aspects of tax sale. The next slide, Treasury. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $1,174,000. Treasury is responsible for all banking services of the city, cash management, investment activity of the city, as well as the issuance of all debt. Administration. This is the unit that provides executive direction to all bureaus of the Finance Department. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $1,930,000, and again, general funds. Procurement. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $3,624,000, again, general fund. This bureau provides and assists all agencies in the procurement of goods and services for operations and capital improvements. Surplus property. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $122,000. This is a special fund program. This program is primarily responsible for auction services of equipment and furniture, and they bring in annually well in excess of their costs. From 2012 through 18, they averaged $700,000 a year in sales, and their budget again is less than $125,000 annually. Moving to printing services, The fiscal 20 recommendation is $3,431,000. This is an internal service fund. Printing Services provides all types of document services, graphics, printing, and copying functions on behalf of city agencies. Accounts payable, the fiscal 20 recommendation is $1,028,000. This is a general fund function. And accounts payable is responsible for processing all invoices on behalf of all city agencies. They average approximately 10,400 invoices monthly. Payroll. The 20 recommendation is $3,527,000. It's a general fund program. This function provides weekly, bi-weekly, seasonal payroll services, including summer payments for the youth workers. They handle garnishments, W-2s, all tax-related reporting for payroll. Accounting. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $1,831,000. It's general fund. This program handles all of the accounting and reporting from an accounting perspective. All transactions are in compliance with GAAP, which is governmental accepted accounting principles. Risk management. The funding recommendation for fiscal 20 is $8,817,000. This is an internal service fund. Risk management is responsible for all of the city's insurance programs, responsible for administering the city's workers' compensation claims program, and is responsible for safety training citywide. Operating budget, the fiscal 20 recommendation is $2,012,000. This program prepares the operating budget, performs legislative analysis on local legislation, and is also responsible for conducting management research studies on an annual basis. Fiscal integrity. The fiscal 20 recommendation is $1,177,000. It's a general fund program. This program is responsible for the management of all tax credits. They handle commercial assessment appeals, also responsible for pilot management. The goal is to eliminate fraud and waste as it relates to fraudulent tax credits. And finally, finance project management. The 20 recommendation is $0 in the operating budget. This will be funded through capital funds associated with the planned ERP program for fiscal 20. And what the role of this unit is to assist the department in implementing all new applications. So that's a high-level overview of the department. I think I did that in 10 minutes.
9.5 minutes, outstanding. Thank you. We've been joined by Councilman Yitzi Schleifer from the 5th District, member of the committee, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th District, member of the committee, and Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, Vice Chair of the committee. Director, one of the questions that I've been asking every agency is, as you're well aware, we had a cybersecurity incident on or around May 6th, and we've had an email outage from May 7th through about May 25th. At what point did Frank Johnson, the city CIO, reach out to you to let you know what was going on?
On May 6th.
On May 6th. Were any offers made to set up email accounts for your office?
Yes.
So the CIO offered to create Gmail accounts for your office?
I believe he made the recommendation to do so, and then we implemented the.
Okay, but asked you to create the Gmail account?
Yes.
Okay, got it. And have you received consistent communication from Mr. Johnson since the incident began?
Daily.
Daily. Okay, thank you. That's about infinitely times more communication than we've received on the city council. Okay. For the past, I believe for the past 3 fiscal years, we've spent approximately $14 million on contractual services. Can you provide kind of a high-level overview of what that's being spent on?
Yes, for the Department of Finance,
Yes.
that would include banking services, our relationship with vendors for the collection of coinage daily as it relates to clearing out the parking meters. The contractual dollars also support the accounting system, the vendors that support the city's accounting system, the city's payroll system, supporting the contractors for our budget system and for our procurement system. Those would be the large ticket items.
Got it. Councilwoman Sneed, and we've also been joined by Councilman Robert Stokes from the 12th District.
Thank you. We handle calls from the county when it's in reference to water, don't we? Do we?
We do.
We do. Okay. And so I'm just curious, out of all the city and county residents, do we know if folks generally pay online? Like, what do we know the percentage of pay online, sending checks? Do we know that?
We can provide that information, but yes, city and county residents do pay water bills online. They also mail-in payments, and they walk-in payments.
But do we have it broken down? You might not have, this is just me.
But we can provide that.
Okay, you do have that. That's what I want to know. And then in terms of, because we're going through this whole ransomware with the water department, do we have a plan as to, once everything is up and working, how we're going to recoup some of the fees for late? Or it's just across the board, no one is going to be considered late?
Yes, we have waived interest and penalties regarding water bills and all other types of bills until we're back up.
So
This is effective the date of the incident.
Okay.
Until the date where we return to normal operations.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Schleifer, then Burnett, then Middleton. Councilman, use them, or get a little closer to the mic, please. Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about the loss of business policy that the city has?
Yes, the city does have a loss of business policy regarding the various operations for city government.
Okay, and so for that policy, is that going to cover the interruption of service for the cyber attack?
I'm sorry?
Is it going to cover the loss of business during this period of time for the cyber attack?
That is under discussion with the carrier as we speak.
Does the policy cover cyber attacks, the one that we have?
No, it does not.
So we're not covered for cyber attacks.
Correct.
So, I'm a little confused. So the carrier, why would they cover us if we don't have coverage for that?
Well, we believe the contract is subject to interpretation, so we're negotiating with the carrier to see what we can do.
Gotcha. So is there a reason we don't have insurance for that?
I think we're getting into some areas that I'm not going to be able to comment on because the cyber attack is subject to a criminal investigation, and we don't want to say anything that could impact our ability to pursue legal action one way or the other.
Well, I mean, I think no, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think I would just disagree. I think that as far as our coverage is concerned, even not talking about this specific incident, but in general, how it's determined what we're going and what we're covering and what we're not covering. Because I mean, cybersecurity and cyber attacks is one of the most common now things that have been putting, businesses out of service for different periods of time. So, is it something that we reevaluate every year, our policy? And if so, why wouldn't we have had a policy on that?
So I'm not able to comment on that because of what I just said.
Okay.
This is all subject to legal action, criminal investigation, and I'm not able to comment on it.
Okay, that doesn't make sense. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Burnett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Director. I had a similar line of questioning and understand the concerns that you may have in answering that line of questioning specifically publicly. So I'll take a broader view. What is the relationship between your agency and the BCIT as it relates to revenue collection specifically, and in advising that a significant portion of the revenues being collected are done online? Can you speak to how often your agency is advised by BCIT on protections to keep the systems operational? How often do you meet? And is there a strategic plan moving forward to prevent this type of thing from crippling the city's ability to collect revenue due to obvious inadequacies in the IT infrastructure?
Okay. I'll try to generally answer your questions. The Finance Department and BSIT meet regularly. The discussions are ongoing in nature as it relates to BSIT's support of all of the Finance Department's business systems, which would include our accounting system, billing systems, the city's general ledger. These discussions are weekly, if not daily, with standard meetings. Since this event, as I indicated earlier, I've been getting daily updates, if not daily meetings. So there's extensive coordination between BSIT and the Finance Department. And there is a strategy for assisting the Finance Department in bringing its systems back online. Now, in terms of the dollar amount of this, the overwhelming majority of the dollars, general fund dollars that the city collects, are not impacted by this. When you think of real property taxes, income taxes, state aid, highway user revenue, those comprise approximately 93% of the total general fund. So the part that we're having difficulty with right now is less than 10% of the general fund.
Okay. I mean, I would still wager that that's a pretty significant impact, regardless, given how tight everything is in the city of Baltimore, and the ability for us to continue operations is critical. I'll stop there for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilman John Bullock from the 9th District, Councilman Bill Henry, 4th District, member of the committee. I think I said Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District. If I didn't, I apologize. Middleton.
Good afternoon. Just a quick question. How are you communicating during this, I guess, ransomware attack with the MVA? because I have constituents that, you know, they want to get their tags and they find out that they had to pay a fine, and they come down and try to pay the fine, and the people can't go on the system, and it's like 1 or 2 days before they, you know, and their tags have expired, and they have the money to pay, but somehow you can't get connected to the MVA to prove that they paid so they can get their tags. Is that, you know, and then of course they call me to see what I can do, which is nothing. So I'm wondering how you're handling that, because one of the persons complained that they had called first and they weren't told to have the original bill. You know, people relying on the system again to look things up. So I think there's a communication that's one issue that I'm finding.
Well, that's, okay, we have Janice Simmons, the Bureau Chief for Revenue Collection, that will address that.
So starting this morning, we were provided with 5 additional laptops, and we're going to be using Open Baltimore, which shows the initial date that the citation was issued. Okay. That's needed so that we can calculate the penalty from the date that the citation was issued, and that's going to enable us to come up with the amounts.
Okay.
And keep in mind, most people, all people were given an original citation as well as a warning notice. Most of these people who are requesting VR-119 releases, but we still have the ability to go on Open Baltimore and get the information that we needed.
And what had happened, they waited till a day or two before the end of the month to take care of their business, and of course in a panic.
Right.
But it sounds like you figured out a way to kind of help iron that out.
Yes, we have.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Stokes?
Mr. Raymond, I just have a question. Can you give us, Mr. Chairman, a request for the list of surplus property in Baltimore City? I know it's not listed under councilmatic districts, but because I have a lot of people interested in buildings in my district and find out who actually own them. So just a request, a list of the surplus property disposal in Baltimore City and whoever owned the property.
Are you talking about surplus schools or just surplus property?
Schools, the property itself. Is it broken down by, I know you can do it by schools, but
Correct.
property itself too?
So I think that might be something that the Office of Real Estate can provide us within the Comptroller's office.
Yeah, the surplus property that's part of the Department of Finance
Okay.
is for an auction function for equipment, furniture, things.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Vehicles, things of that nature.
Okay, thanks.
Are you good, or do you, okay. All right, so we're gonna make that request though at Real Estate? Okay. Can you just put that as a note, Jeff, and we'll wait until we get to Real Estate?
I can. Do you want me to note it as an official request now, or wait until real estate is here to?
Let's wait.
Okay.
Let's wait. Okay, thank you. Vice Chair Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Raymond.
Good afternoon.
So I just had a couple questions related to procurement. In the agency book, it's noted that so the budget reflects the transfer of 3 positions to increase the number of purchase orders issued meeting benchmark timeframes. So what are the benchmark timeframes as it relates to purchase orders, through procurement?
Yeah, but what it is 3 vacant positions were transferred in the current fiscal year to assist with the procurement workload as it related to, all aspects of procurement, the RFPs, the advertising, et cetera. We want to reduce the number of bidders, the average number of bidders that have the opportunity to bid on city work. So we'd like for that number to be, 5 or greater. And we have the procurement chief here also, Aaron Scher.
And I don't know if you want to speak to that. So how does that impact the time, I guess, from when an agency makes the initial request to
it'll help speed up the cycle time to reduce the overall number of days to, from the RFP to the award.
Right, so currently, what is the, I guess, what's our goal?
So there's various turnaround times based on the dollar amount and the type of procurement.
Let me give you an example. So for example, myself and Chairman Costello both have a rec center in our his district and my district that are that require items like pool tables and gaming tables and stuff like that. And so we constantly hear from Rec and Parks that the request has been made, but it's stuck in procurement. And it's been stuck for months.
So that dollar value, I believe, is around $180,000.
Okay.
So it's in the tier that's $50,000 and above, which includes both MBU and Board of Estimates. So those are things that add to the timeline, which is 150 days from becoming ready for purchasing, which means the agency approvals have gone through as well as budget. In this case, they're requesting a cooperative, so we're reviewing that, and I believe we expect to have it on the board agenda for June 12th.
So in a scenario like that, if I'm hearing you properly, it could take at least 5 months before we even get to the purchasing.
That is correct. We try to have anything that's over 50 would be considered a formal solicitation if we are doing a competitive bid. We try to have that advertised for 6 to 8 weeks to maximize the exposure to potential bidders. There's additional time necessary if there are MBE, WBE goals because we need to have those assessed, set, and then reviewed as part of the evaluation of the bids as well.
And 5 months is our standard time frame for activity like that?
So anything over 50 has the additional requirements. So yes, that is the standard time frame. We do try to expedite, and in fact, I believe we're going to come in well under that for this particular request because we're using a cooperative contract. That's where I believe the National Joint Powers Association has already done the competitive process. So we can shorten the time frame by using a contract that was already competitively bid by another government agency or another jurisdiction. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's good to hear about the it just seems like 5 months is a long time.
Some take a lot longer based on the complexity. So if something is more simple and there isn't a lot of workload in front of it, we can do it faster. However, we do have to handle the workload that's come in advance of that. And then we often get urgent requests that come in and push the others down the line. So for instance, during this time frame, we are supporting BSIT and agencies in their urgent requirements, and so that will make our regular contracts take a little longer. So, but we try to prioritize based on the agency requests. If they note that something is of a higher priority, we try to move it to the front of the line, even if it's not up next in the rotation.
And the budget book mentions that some of the time was possibly even lengthened because of the retirement of certain managers.
Yes,
So how many managers retired?
So last fiscal year, we have had 4 supervisors, and we have one that's retiring this month. We have another that's soon facing retirement. We have one that resigned while another went out on FMLA. We were down to 1 of 4 supervisors during the last summer. Like the May through, I believe, August time period, we were very low staffed.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First question's a really little one. In Service 148, revenue collection, I noticed that in fiscal 15 and 16, fiscal 15, our collection percentage of real property tax was 96%. Then it went up to 98% in 16. And then it went down to 97% in 17. And we made the target 97% for fiscal 18 and hit it. And exceeded it, actually, went back up to 98%. So the question is, why did we leave the target at 97%? Like, why is our target 97 and not 98, not 96? Why did we pick 97?
So the target's always between 96 and 98%. And that's because it's typically like 238,000 properties in the tax sale. Out of that, about 5,700 to 6,000 revert to the mayor and city council. That percentage that reverts to the mayor and city council is deducted from 100%, and whatever it is for that year is what the...
So we're just taking 97 because it's like the middle point
Right.
of where it usually fluctuates. Okay, thank you. Oh,
Can you repeat that number again? I'm sorry.
Excuse me?
Can you repeat the number again?
Repeat the number?
Yeah. well, you
So
said
between 96 and 98%.
I think she means the number of properties that don't that
238,000.
go to tax sale every
238
Go.
properties, 238,000 tax bills are mailed July
are mailed
1.
out. Okay, and between 5,000 and 6,000.
Revert to the mayor and city council.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. On Service 707, Risk Management, it lists that this is risk management for employee injuries. How does the city's drug testing policy relate to our risk management policy? Are we doing drug testing because we are trying to minimize the number of driving accidents for our employees?
In large part, yes.
Because if that's the case, why do we have drug testing for positions that don't drive city vehicles?
What we test for is pre-employment, post-accident, whether it's we're at fault or not, and then we do it to, if you're going to get a driving permit. So those are the type of tests that we do, that we're sending people for.
No, I guess what I'm looking for is what's the justification for pre-employment drug testing? If you're going to do like random tests to make sure people aren't doing drugs while they're on the job, or you're going to do pre-employment testing of people who are driving city vehicles, I get both of those. But if you're an office worker, why do you do pre-employment drug testing?
Well, everybody has a pre-employment
Why?
drug test, but the random only applies to drivers.
Okay, I get that, but why? Why are we randomly no, scratch that, reverse it. Why are we requiring all employees to do a pre-employment drug test regardless of what they're applying for?
Because we want to ensure up front that we're not bringing people into the workforce that have a problem. If we identify the problem after they're hired, we can address it. If we catch it within 6 months, we can release them on probation. If the problem comes up after 6 months, we can refer them to employee assistance program. But we're trying not to have problems walking in the door. Yeah, we're not going to intentionally hire someone with a drug or alcohol problem and hire that person. That will increase the city's costs. So we're trying to minimize that. We want clean people coming into the workforce.
I raise this question because a lot of other cities around the country are noting that a desire to have a completely clean force dramatically limits the employment pool for the city and is sort of a policy reinforcement of a social stigma that appears to be eroding at an increasing rate. As we look towards the very serious possibility of legalizing certain recreational drug use in the relatively near future, and we have already examples of, for example, our state's attorney making it clear that she does not intend to prosecute certain amounts of recreational drug use. What is the benefit to the city of purposefully restricting our potential employee pool by doing pre-employment drug testing for all positions? That's still kind of a question.
Yeah, I think I already answered it.
No, I mean, you made the point of this is what we have been doing it for,
Right.
but keeping in mind that society is evolving around us. All right, I'll reframe the question. At what point would a reevaluation of that policy begin? Whose responsibility
I
would
refer to the Department of Human Resources.
Okay, I'll take that. And then the last question, in Service 708, we hired a Baltimore fellow to expand citizen engagement in the budget process, and that appears to have been a success. Are we looking to make that a permanent position?
So it will depend on funding from that stream. So we've been using the Baltimore Core Fellow Program to do that program. So we would like to extend that because it has been a success, but it will depend on.
So would that mean that we would keep hiring a different Baltimore fellow every year, or does it mean that we would say, oh, this worked, so let's try to find permanent funding for this Baltimore fellow who did it?
It could be either.
Could be either.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Raymond, as you are aware, we're in the first year of implementation of Council President Scott's equity assessment legislation. I have a couple questions about that. First, have you hired or identified an equity coordinator, and if so, who is that?
No, we have not hired yet.
Okay. And that doesn't, my understanding is that doesn't need to be a new hire. That can just be someone identified as that individual. Have you held or scheduled any trainings for the Department on Equity and Inclusion?
To date, no.
Okay. And has the Department of Finance conducted a baseline analysis of the equity impacts of the agency's existing and proposed actions?
I'm not sure. I have to follow up with you on that.
Okay. Councilman Pinkett, and we've been joined by Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark from the 14th District, Councilman John Block from the 9th District. Then after Councilwoman Clark, we're going to go to Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Raymond, which service would include the late night commercial operations?
The Bureau of Revenue Collection, Service 148.
You said serve. Okay. Are there any performance measures for that aspect of Service 148?
Not presently, no.
Any particular reason why there aren't any?
I would say primarily because late night is a small part of the overall functions within finance and within the Bureau of Revenue Collection.
No, and I wouldn't disagree with that assertion, but it becomes a big aspect of what occurs in the community as it relates to these businesses and how either positive or negative relationship they have with the community. And so I think there should be some sort of measurement that either reflects how the community is successfully able to engage with finance as it relates to the late night establishments, even related to the success or as it relates to appeals or opposing appeals related to late night commercial operations, and how impactful our efforts are related to addressing some of these enforcement related to. I know that you aren't necessarily responsible for the enforcement piece, but definitely there needs to be some assessment, because I think that what we've come to recognize is that a citation might not be the mechanism to really address these businesses, and so we probably would need data to show that that this might not that we need to be thinking of some other legal mechanisms to address late night establishments.
I don't disagree with anything you've said. We'll take it under consideration. I think the Finance Department's doing a very good job with the enforcement of late night as it relates to the issuing of the licenses or taking the licenses away, or adjudicating the appeals process. We work hand in hand with the council when these problem entities come up in your area. We reach out to let you know when the hearings are, et cetera. I actually reside over the appeals process directly. Actually, and I'm not joking, it's like I serve as the administrative judge for every appeal that comes forward. So we take it very seriously. We realize how important this is to the communities to have these negligent entities creating chaos and havoc late at night, the drug dealing, potential prostitution, all of those issues. Mm-hmm. We're aware of that. We take the council's thoughts into consideration as it relates to the appeals process, and it helps me formulate my decision regarding the appeals.
We've been joined by President Scott. You said that you believe finance has been successful in the enforcement as it relates to late night. I want to ask you, what do you mean by how do you measure success? But prior to that answer, I want to preface that with, to me, it seems as though if an establishment is operating without if their permit has been revoked or something like that, that the only power you have is to cite them. And so if a business decides that the cost of doing business is that $500 citation or whatever it might be, how are we measuring success if the business remains open late night, despite the fact that we've revoked their license?
And that's where we're working with other agencies that have the authority to do shutdown. The finance department does not have the authority to do shutdown. We do the licensing, we do the appeals, we can take the license away, but the finance department does not have the authority to actually go out and put the padlock on an establishment.
So who would, under a scenario where there's a citation? Yeah. Councilman Henry.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask if there was any way that part of this question could also be held for the police department, because while they're not specifically called out in the legislation, because they have the general power to enforce all city laws, they can go into a business that does not have a license and say, listen, you don't have a license, you have to shut this place down, and if they disagree, they can be arrested for failing to obey the orders of a police officer. So that's not written directly into the law, but it's part of the police's ability to enforce all existing city laws.
Okay, so I'll table it until we have the police department, but that's not the way it's happening in the street. Councilman Burnett.
I'll continue on that. I would say that your staff has been incredibly helpful in navigating the late night operating process. However, that process could absolutely use a little more clarity in its operations. And I'll give an example. I have a business that was applied for a license. The community did not support it. They got the necessary opposition to stop the granting of the license, of which I supported. But then there was an appeal process. And then that seemed to get shut down, and then seems to be like an appeal of the appeal that's continued on, where like they've been given like multiple extensions before they can not overcome the appeal of the denial. Like, it is just, I understand what's going on, but being able to convey that to the community has not been very easy. And so I think we should just, not that we have to figure out right here, but I would like to continue this conversation so that whether it's revisions to the law itself that need to take place, but there just has to be a more clearly defined process, because as I'm walking through my constituents as to what's happening, if I'm having to like jump through like 50 hoops to explain it to them, then there's no way that they're going to get it off break. And just, it's another way, that we can just better engage people in that. The other thing I'd mention, or wanted to mention, aside of the late night operating license, is what would be the possibility or just more of a theoretical question. So I know a lot of business licenses just generally are granted by the state of Maryland. Is that correct? To operate a business in the state, there's a state license. Is there a separate city license process, or is it just an acknowledgement of the state license?
A lot of, they have to get a business license from the city.
Okay.
For whatever their business is, what secondhand dealer's license, junkyards, et cetera.
Okay. And so just to go back to the councilman's point then, in any of that process, you don't have any authority to pull those licenses if there's a violation of the late night operating license? Or is that something that we need to look at in the law itself?
I'd say we can look at that, and I'll be happy to have this discussion.
Okay, because I think that's the frustration that people have is many of these businesses are frequent violators all around the board, whether it's the health department, selling Lucy, staying open late. I mean, it's multiple check boxes, and the late night operating license is one thing that we can hold them accountable on. But if there's a business that is all around trying to break every possible rule, they should not be in business in Baltimore City. Is my opinion, and there needs to be a way that we can sort of better connect those dots.
And I would agree with you.
So let's talk offline about that. The only other question I had was in the budget book on service 699 procurement. It indicates that by city charter, the procurement process must be centralized with the exception of public works and professional services. Can you speak to why those two particular areas are not included in the charter provisions and sort of the logic behind that?
Okay. In accordance with the charter, public works, what we're referring to is capital construction, not the Department of Public Works.
Okay.
So in accordance with the city charter, the Department of Public Works, Department of Transportation, and Department of General Services specifically have their own delegated procurement authority for capital construction work. So if, I'm just making an example, if DOT wants to build a new bridge, they would do their own procurement. It would not come through the finance department because it's capital. Now, so that's DOT, DGS, and DPW. They have their own delegated procurement authority, which is expressly stated in the charter. Now, as it relates to professional services are deemed not to be an item that the Bureau of Procurement administers. Those are administered between the agency and the city's law department.
Okay.
And if it's determined that the service that's being sought is a professional service, it goes through a separate process outside of the Bureau of Procurement and the Finance Department.
Okay.
And again, that's charter also.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman Sneed.
Can you give examples of the off-cycle check service 703? I was just trying to figure out if the off-cycle is different from the off-cycle. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
Okay. All an off-cycle check means is that we're issuing a check because the normal payroll process didn't work properly. For example, maybe an individual was supposed to receive out-of-title pay for acting in a higher capacity. And let's say that that was supposed to start May the 1st, and it's May 15, and the paperwork still hasn't caught up. We'd issue an off-cycle check to resolve that issue. It could also be that somebody didn't have their payroll turned in. So instead of saying, well, because you didn't get your check today, you have to wait 2 weeks, we'll issue an off-cycle check. So, like I said, it could be for someone missed acting pay, somebody didn't turn their timesheet in a timely manner. And we try to avoid issuing off-cycle checks to the extent that we can, but those are some of the reasons why.
When we do the off-cycle checks, are we paid, are we taxed, or is there a percentage or fee that we have to pay?
No, it's a payroll-related matter. So it's just, as I indicated, let's say, for example, a director of an agency retires, the deputy director is now the acting director. Because they're formally acting, they're supposed to get I'm just making a number up, an extra $300 a pay. The paperwork wasn't processed timely. The person's not getting the extra compensation. We'd issue an off-cycle check to address it.
I get that, but sometimes when you cut checks, sometimes you have to pay an additional, I don't know, 5 cent a check or something like that.
Yes.
Is that a cost? Yeah, that's all I'm wondering.
Yes.
Oh, we
Yeah, I
do have to.
apologize.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Council President Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Mr. Director, I know I was out of the room, unfortunately, when Councilman Costello asked these questions on my behalf, but I just want to follow up. He asked you about the agency hiring or identifying an equity coordinator, and the answer was no, correct? He also asked you if you had scheduled any trainings for your department on equity and inclusion, and he also asked if your department had conducted a baseline analysis of the equity impact of the agency's existing and proposed actions. So the answer to all of those are no?
That's correct. So I'm behind on that.
So, yes, well behind. So, Mr. Director, when does typically, and I know the answer, but for the general public, when does the following year's fiscal budget start to get created? So when did you start creating this budget?
Last summer.
Last summer?
Summer of 18.
No, this budget. So, yeah, summer 18, right.
20 or 19.
Yeah, that's right. So, if by
Excuse
now,
me,
yeah.
I'm not clear. What, current year?
The current budget that we're discussing today, when did you start creating
Okay, so
it?
we're discussing the fiscal
This 20 budget, yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's the one I mean.
Last summer.
Last summer, correct. So, if by law, the fiscal 2021 budget has to be one done through a lens of equity, and the finance department, which BBMR is a part of, has not as of yet done anything around equity, how can we expect the fiscal 21 year budget to be done through a lens of equity?
Okay, you referenced 21.
Right. So you said that you started to create this budget that we're discussing with, it's the fiscal 20 budget, right?
Right.
Last summer. We're in the summer proceeding when you'll start working on the fiscal 21 budget. You haven't hired an equity coordinator. You haven't had a equity training. You haven't done anything around equity. So one would assume that fiscal 21's budget under those guidelines won't be presented through a lens of equity because you don't have anyone working on equity.
Okay, so the 21 budget is another year from now.
I understand. Let me try to make this more plain,
Right.
Mr. Director. So you said that this budget that we're discussing, right? You started to work and create that budget last summer,
Correct.
right? When are you going to start to create the budget for fiscal 21?
This summer.
This summer, right? When are you expected to hire someone to work on equity in your department?
Well, I'm not sure if we're going to hire someone or assign the duties to someone.
Well, I just want to remind you that if you're assigning those duties to someone, that person has to be someone under law that solely reports to you. So you have to remember that, and that will mean that that person under law also would have to be a city resident. So with that being said, you also have to remember that in the first year of the equity assessment program, you, along with the other agencies, are responsible for participating in training, which you have not done, but also in producing a baseline analysis of the equity impacts of the agency's existing and proposed actions and policies encompassing all of your programs, your operations, and your capital budget. That has to be done by October the 17th of this year. And without staffing and extreme and very quick and swift action, I find that hard to believe. But also, more importantly, the biggest portion for you guys as an agency is going to be making sure that the fiscal 21 year budget is presented through a lens of equity and is in an equitable way. Because I'm just going to tell you right now, if the budget comes next year and it doesn't look like it's an equitable budget to us, you might as well put it in a recycling bin. So my next question to you, Mr. Director, is for the past 3 fiscal years, we spent around $14 million on contractual services. Can you please provide us with a list of these services that are contracted out for the past fiscal years? How much was paid for each contract? And also how the services were rendered and how this increased city efficiency and the justification for these contracted services. Because I think that, and this is not just in particular finance, there are many agencies where I believe we are contracting things out that we can and probably should have our own professional people in the department doing. So if we could have that as a request, that would be greatly appreciated.
You got it. Are there any further questions from any of my colleagues? If not, thank you, Director. Excuse me, Director Raymond. This committee is in recess for about.
I heard my name called. I was waiting my turn.
Councilwoman Clark.
I'm sorry. Actually, this isn't a question because we had the conversation, but I just want it on the public record, if you don't mind. As you know, a couple years ago, we met about the issue of retiree prescription benefits. And we were responding at that time to a flyer that was out from Human Resources that warned people that as of now, basically the city would give up its sponsorship of a prescription program and would rely on Medicare to fill the gap through the Affordable Care Plan Act. And everybody went into a panic, and we had a hearing. And at that hearing, you came representing the agency and the city and said that the city would not give up sponsoring a prescription plan for employees and retirees. And that there would be a plan developed, it would be city-sponsored, and basically it would, I can't remember what, a group would be working on it but would go to representatives of
The Health
the
Insurance
beneficiaries before any final decision was made. So, can you just confirm that what I just said was the case and where it is today with the evolution of a plan?
Right.
Excuse me, I just must have swallowed a fly.
So,
Director, can you please be
essentially
as
what you stated is correct. The city will sponsor a plan for calendar 20. There would be no changes to the current plan for retirees. At the earliest, the change would be calendar 21.
Fiscal or calendar?
Calendar 21. And there would be negotiations on any of those changes with the Health Insurance Committee.
Period.
So in the short term, there are no changes.
There are no changes. The earliest a change could occur would be January of 2021. That would be the earliest, and before anything would be adopted by the Board of Estimates, it would be reviewed in
Negotiated
with representatives.
with the labor unions through the Health Insurance Committee.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director. We're going to go into recess. We will start up the next panel, which is Accountability and Transparency, Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions, the City Auditor, OIG, and Law.
Okay.
If those agencies could please come up to the front and grab a seat.
Yep, thank you very much.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Is this not?